Now our opening words. This is Prayer to Winter by Deborah Weiner. O Spirit of life and love, we pause for a moment on this snowy day to reflect on the changes 1 week can make in our lives. We celebrate the Feast of Imbolc, the pagan holiday that heralds the coming of spring. Our hearts stir with the thought that lambs are being born, that the light is increasing, that even if not here, then in other parts of our country, the earth has begun to stir from its winter sleep. We bow to the forces of nature that have stirred again and again and reminded us through storms and sudden changes in our weather that we are not in charge, that Earth is moved by jet streams, polar vortices, and Alberta clippers, and we must endure and be patient. And through it all, we are reminded again and again that we are not alone. May we continue to recognize that in this may we continue to recognize that in this spiritual home, we are held in this house of memory and hope. We will be welcomed and supported in this temple of celebration and contemplation. We may bring all of who we are and be both honored and affirmed. For all this and all that will come in the days ahead, we say, Amen and blessed be. Okay. Now it's time for us to light the chalice, which is the symbol of our faith. Mikki is going to actually light it, and I'll read some words while she does that. Across the distance, the light from within me shines, sending love to all. Across the distance, your light is fuel that warms me and helps to keep my own light burning. Together, we keep the flame of community burning bright. Next, we're going to do a reading and meditation. I'll go ahead and read, and then we'll have a little time of silence for meditating on these words. This is this has to do with the earth for one thing, but it also is about water. And Imbolc is also St. Bridget's Day, and among other things, she's the saint of wells and water, but I think wells specifically. This reading is an excerpt from Thich Nhat Hanh. Water flows from high in the mountains. Water runs deep down in the earth. Miraculously, water comes to us and sustains all life. Water and sun, green plants. When the water of compassion falls, even a desert becomes an immense green ocean. So let us meditate on compassion and water. Today, we are fortunate to have Mikki Baloy with us to lead our service. Any of you who come regularly know Mikki. She often celebrates the solstices and equinoxes and quarter festivals with us. So today, Mikki is going to speak to us about Imbolc.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you to the Board of Worship for having me back. And happy Imbolc. There is some conversation about what date it actually falls on. It's usually acknowledged as February 2nd, although I've also seen it fall later in the year, depending on the lunar calendar. This year, I believe it happens on the new moon, which is February 11th. So there's sort of the commonly accepted observances, which are largely based on the Christian feast days. And then there's the ways that pre-Christian societies most likely mark time. Either way, we are in the Imbolc window now. And Imbolc is the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. So despite our snow today, we are halfway there. And Imbolc also means in the belly, which is a reference to the pregnant ewes that we heard about before. And they weren't ready quite yet to give birth to their lambs, but there might be some early milk now, and the early signs of abundance and thaw that would give some hope to people who had endured a long winter. Imbolc is also, as Sarah mentioned, very closely associated with Bridget. And I have a picture that I found of her. And she is a goddess of many things, wells, as we heard, also the land itself, particularly Celtic lands, and all things hearth and home, also midwifery, children, weaving, augury, beekeeping, cattle, beer, poetry, healing, and smithcraft. And you can see in this picture the sheep, a cow, the fire, and the snowdrops in her dress. So that's a lot of things to be a goddess of. And so I want to break it down a little bit. Bridget is a solar deity, so everything related to the sun and fire are hers. And that includes golden, fiery things like honey and beer. And she's the goddess of the hearth and of what we might call traditional women's work, like cooking, childbearing, and healing. She also loves music and poetry, as well as the fiery foundry of the blacksmith. And that might seem like a strange collection of arts, but healing, poetry, and smithing are all transformational crafts. They all take an idea and make it manifest, which is also not unlike pregnancy. They use skill and a little mystery to take raw material and refine it into something beautiful. And that's all Bridget's domain. And as mother of the hearth and the land, she's incredibly generous with everyone who's in her care. And there are myths about Bridget rewarding those who are likewise generous and punishing those who are not. Bridget has a very keen interest in sharing in the abundance of the land in particular, and making sure that everyone has enough. Traditionally in the Celtic lands, it's well known that Bridget walks with her cow the night before Imbolc. And still today, people will put a piece of fabric or a shawl outside to be blessed by Bridget as she moves through the land. And then that fabric would be used maybe as a sort of prayer tie. So you could attach this sort of blessed prayer tie, this bit of fabric that held a wish of yours, and maybe tie it to a flag or tie it to a tree on your property, or bring it into the house. Or if it was a shawl, you would wear it knowing that your prayers were being answered. The Irish women of ancient times would very bravely put out their hearth fire on a probably day like today, a cold day, and travel to the nearest sacred site, perhaps a well, and meet the rest of the community there. And the pinnacle of the day's festival and celebration would be a great fire ceremony. And at the end of that, each householder would take an ember from that fire to light their home hearth. So the old individual fires were extinguished. And then as a community, they'd light a new one and each bring home a little of that fire for warmth and light and to cook food for the weeks ahead. So Imbolc was traditionally, and even a little bit still today, marked by lots of bonfires, blazing hearths, candlelight, and feasts, particularly of special seasonal foods, including bannocks. And I made bannocks this year myself, and they're very nourishing, very hearty, sustaining oat cakes. And during Imbolc, they are said to be best served with a healthy dollop of butter and a bit of honey. So imagine this round cake with all of that yellow fat and sweetness from the honey, a lot like the sun. So I want to pause here and review what I've said so far, because although this might all seem like an old myth, I believe there's still a lot of relevance for us modern people. There's a reason that these stories and traditions have survived. And I think also why the early Christian fathers found it easier to incorporate Bridget into the company of saints rather than do away with her completely. And I also have a picture here of Saint Bridget. And so here she is still carrying fire. I think she was too strong and too necessary to the people to just fade into history as Christianity entered Ireland. Bridget was the goddess of everything that kept people alive. She was the goddess of wells and clean water, goddess of weaving the cloth that they needed, the goddess of the lambs and the cattle that kept them fed. She was essentially the sun itself, the thing that made things grow. She was the mother that provided everything that people needed, and also the things that made life better, like healing and tools and poetry. And given that the Celtic people weathered these long winters, sometimes during famine and blight or war, she gave them hope that the seasons would turn. And so she can give us hope too, if we want to relate to her. She reminds us that there's always a thaw to follow the freeze. There's always a healing to follow the wound, always a tool to solve a problem. And then inspiration to tell the tale and tell it well. So it seems to me that she's never been more relevant. So how could we mark Imbolc as modern people in ways that feel resonant to us? Well, Bridget has always been a teacher of generosity and hope, bestowing blessings equally and encouraging us to do the same, even to those we find difficult or undeserving. There's a lovely Celtic blessing that we heard in that song earlier that we can offer to ourselves and to others in our meditations or prayers. And I see this as a sort of loving kindness or metta meditation from the Buddhist tradition. It's often really easy to intend good things for the people we like, but much harder to bestow that sort of blessing on the people we find difficult or distasteful. But if you're willing to try, this might be a good practice. So to whomever has our attention, for whatever reason, we can say deep peace of the flowing air to you, deep peace of the smiling stars to you, deep peace of the running waves to you, deep peace of the quiet earth to you. And you could add whatever other deep peace you feel inspired to send them. There's room here for your improvisation. I also recently learned about a Brigidine practice of lighting a candle every day for 19 days, using that candle to invoke Bridget and focus on your hopes. It's understood that the goddess or the saint keeps the flame herself on the 20th day. So, in other words, we don't light a candle then on the 20th day because she's got it. Or maybe by then we've incorporated that light and that hope into our own hearts. Either way, I think that practice is a really sweet lesson in devotion and in faith, in visualization, and then surrender. We do the practice and then we let go on the 20th day. We can also mark Imbolc in the ways that the Celtic ancestors did with crafts. Bridget loves inspiration. So there's bannocks, as I mentioned. And I actually have a recipe here that I'll post in the chat if any of you are curious. They are very hearty, as I said. And then there's also the Bridget cross.
Mikki, you accidentally muted yourself.
Thank you. Clicking too many buttons. So there's also here the Bridget cross, which we saw in the picture of the saint earlier. And there are a lot of videos out there on how to make these. But they originally symbolized the sun and its rays and the turning of the year. But then later they represented the crucifix. But either way you choose to see them, they're said to be very protective talismans. And you could also make bridey dolls, which are there on the right. And these are effigies of Bridget that young girls in Celtic villages would take from house to house. This is also a great time to write poetry if you think you have it in you, and even if you don't. I challenged myself the other day to write a poem for Bridget, and not having written a poem for a very, very long time, I was encouraged by remembering that all of the bards used this very flowery language and a lot of hyperbole in a way that is totally not my style, but it gave me permission to just see what happened. So I sat down to write this poem and I did it in a 9-line format because 3 and 9 are sacred numbers across cultures to the sacred feminine and the goddesses. So my apologies, but here's the poem that I wrote. She of the fire, she of the steel, she of the birthing ewe, of milk and honey, cow and bee, she of the dawn's fresh dew. Bless my hearth and bless my home, bless my land and kin, with health and joy, peace and wealth, grace that all may win, and share the glory that is thine, blessed Bridget ever shine. So write them if you got them. Bridget might give you a little help. And finally, Imbolc is a great time to clean. And I don't just mean to wash your floors or whatever, although you can certainly do that too. But clean the internal house as well. Really consider what old detritus can go. What is the old fire that can be put out? What are the old rushes and straw that can be replaced? So another way to say that is what in you is waiting to thaw? What's gestating and waiting for its moment? What are you anticipating with some hope and desire? And are there ways to make space for that in your life right now, physically, emotionally, socially? This is a really auspicious time to look forward to the flowering and the birth of the new and to take active steps in that direction. That's often the piece that's missing in a lot of sort of new age talk about manifestation and visualization. You have to act as well. You have to make the space for those things to be born. And that's hard for some of us right now. We've had a really long, like year-long winter. We've had to buckle down and be in survival mode for a very long time. And I find in myself simultaneously a burning desire to make plans and a huge reluctance to do it because I don't want to be disappointed again. And that tension itself is really draining. And the inability to see any kinds of future past this week is sometimes a symptom of trauma, as well as practical circumstances. So I just want to name that and offer some kindness in remembering that not everybody is able to look ahead or to make plans. But we can see even that tension and that exhaustion with how things have been as our old fire, our old winter straw. And we can start to make space for healing, whatever that might look like for you. So, for instance, you might search out a therapist if you don't already have one, or find some online events and groups that feel safe and nourishing and connective. You can maybe think about what you'd really love to do this summer when hopefully things are a little bit easier. There is likely something to look forward to and to begin to clear the way. We might have to be modest in our anticipation, but I do think that we can still be hopeful. I think Bridget would ask us now to light whatever communal fires we can and share those embers. We don't have to be resilient alone. We don't have to be hopeful alone. We can borrow that from people who have a little bit to spare. And this is more of the generosity and the wish of deep peace that she brings us. Imbolc reminds us that we can be encouraged, that our intentions and our connections to each other matter, that by cleansing our homes and our hearts, and lighting oodles of candles and eating well and sharing poems and songs, that we not only survive, but create an energy of blessing for ourselves and for each other. Bridget would ask us not to lose heart and to bring some hope, like those bits of fabric or those new fires, into our homes and to use them well. She tells us there's always a tool, a poem, a spark of life, a change of season. There's always hope.
And once again, Mikki will extinguish the chalice while I read some words. This is called We Are One. Never has it been more true than now. We extinguish this flame, but the sparks within us remain alight. From each of us in our supposed solitude, the signals buzz and hum, sparkling through space one to another, connecting us invisibly but palpably. We are one, and from every window our light shines. Thank you. I was going to conclude with some lines from a Gaelic runes, which happens to be this deep peace. So since we've already heard it several times, I will just say, deep peace of the infinite peace to you. May it be so. Okay, that concludes our service this morning.